Before you count your money, before you pop the champagne, before you pencil in the Super Bowl run, the Philadelphia Eagles just got hit with news that nobody saw coming. And it didn't happen on the field. It didn't happen in a game. It didn't happen when the lights were on and the crowd was roaring. No. It happened in a weight room. Quietly. Suddenly. A man who cost this team 2 third-round draft picks and $100 million walked into the building ready to work, and walked out on the physically unable to perform list. Day 1. Training camp. Before a single snap was ever taken. We're talking about Jonathan Greenard. The edge rusher the Philadelphia Eagles bet their entire defensive identity on this offseason. The guy they traded premium draft capital for. The guy they handed a 4-year, $100 million contract to. The guy they were counting on to replace the void left by Jalyx Hunt, who just signed for $120 million with the Carolina Panthers and walked right out the door. The guy who was supposed to walk into that locker room and bring veteran presence, experience, and double-digit sack ability to a young and hungry Eagles pass rush. That guy. He's on the PUP list before he ever put on a helmet in Eagles camp. And now Eagles Nation is asking the question that nobody wants to ask out loud. Is this the beginning of a problem? Is this organization cursed when it comes to keeping their pass rushers healthy? Is $100 million about to sit on the shelf and collect dust? Let's slow this down. Let's pull every thread. Let's talk about how we got here, what it actually means, and why the next few weeks might define whether the Philadelphia Eagles are legitimate Super Bowl contenders, or whether they're about to spend the next 4 months patching together a pass rush with duct tape and prayers. Because this is bigger than one injury report. This is a story about bet-the-farm decisions. About roster construction under pressure. About a franchise riding high off a Super Bowl win and trying to stay on top. About a player who has already been through the fire, and whether he can walk through it one more time. Stay with me. We're going deep. Let's start from the very beginning. Because to understand why this Greenard news hurt so bad, you have to understand what the Eagles were trying to build this offseason, and why the pass rush was the most critical piece of the entire puzzle. After winning Super Bowl 59, the Philadelphia Eagles entered the 2025 season as the hungriest defending champions in the league. They went 12-1 in the regular season when A.J. Brown was healthy. They ran through the playoffs. They beat the Kansas City Chiefs. They had the formula. They had the quarterback in Jalen Hurts. They had the offensive weapons. They had the defense. But then 2025 happened. And 2025 was a year of reckoning for this Eagles organization. Things cracked. Things broke. The offensive line, which had been their identity, started showing wear. Landon Dickerson was hurt. Cam Jurgens was hurt. Lane Johnson was managing a foot. The defense, which was supposed to carry the team when the offense sputtered, ran into its own injury nightmares. And the pass rush, the engine that drives every great defense, started making some very concerning noises. Nolan Smith Jr., a player who was supposed to be the explosive young edge rusher this team needed, got limited to 12 games after aggravating a triceps injury. 12 games. From a guy who was supposed to be a cornerstone of the future. Jalen Carter, who has the talent to be the most dominant defensive tackle in the entire National Football League, was playing through shoulder injuries that had him getting injections just to make it through games. Injections. Mid-season. Just to stay on the field. And then there was the guy who was supposed to lead the room. Jalyx Phillips. Now if you're an Eagles fan, the name Jalyx Phillips probably stings in a very specific way. Because Phillips was the guy. The former first-round pick. The pass rusher who showed flashes of being truly special. The kind of player you build around. But his body just kept failing him. And when his contract came up this offseason, the Eagles had a choice to make. They let him go. Phillips signed with the Carolina Panthers. 4 years. $120 million. And the Eagles stood there with a hole at the most important non-quarterback position in the modern NFL, the pass rusher opposite the defensive tackle. So what did Howie Roseman do? What does Howie Roseman always do? He went and found a solution. And he found it in a very familiar place, a trade. April 24th, 2026. The second night of the NFL Draft. While other teams were picking players, the Eagles were making a phone call to Minnesota. Jonathan Greenard. The Minnesota Vikings starting outside linebacker. A guy who had put up 12.5 sacks with the Houston Texans in 2023. A guy who followed that up with 12 sacks in 2024, his first year in Minnesota. A guy who had shown that he could produce at an elite level when healthy. When healthy. That caveat should have been the biggest part of every conversation. Because Greenard's relationship with injury was complicated. It wasn't new. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern. The deal the Eagles made to get him? Not cheap. Not at all. They sent Minnesota a third-round pick in 2026. They sent them another third-round pick in 2027. 2 premium draft picks. The kind of picks that can turn into starters. The kind of picks that can become contributors for years. Gone. In exchange for a 31-year-old edge rusher with a history of shoulder problems and a 2025 season that ended after just 12 games. And then, because Howie Roseman never does things halfway, the Eagles immediately locked Greenard up. 4 years. $100 million. $50 million guaranteed. $100 million. Stop and think about that number for a second. $100 million. To a man who played 12 games the year before. To a man who had shoulder surgery after the 2025 season. To a man who had never played a game for the Philadelphia Eagles. The belief, the conviction, that this move required was enormous. Roseman saw something. The Eagles coaching staff saw something. They bet on it. They bet big. And now, before Jonathan Greenard ever takes a single practice rep in an Eagles uniform at training camp, he's on the PUP list. Let's talk about what actually happened. Because the details here matter. It wasn't a collision. It wasn't a tackle. It wasn't some violent moment in a practice drill where you could at least say, okay, that's the nature of football. That's what can happen when bodies crash into each other at speed. No. Jonathan Greenard was lifting weights. In the weight room. Before training camp even officially opened. He was doing what every professional athlete does in the days leading up to camp. He was getting his body ready, staying in shape, putting in the work. And something went wrong. A pectoral strain. That's what the Eagles announced. A pec strain. Suffered while lifting before training camp began. Now if you're not familiar with pectoral injuries, let me paint you a picture. The pectoral muscle is one of the most important muscles for an edge rusher. It's what helps you with the arm punch. The push-pull moves off the line. The hand fighting. The swim move. The rip. Every single pass rushing technique an outside linebacker uses at any meaningful level involves the pectoral muscle in some way. A pec strain isn't automatically catastrophic. There's a big difference between a strain and a full tear. A full pec tear, that's season-ending surgery territory. That's the kind of thing that sidelines you for months. A strain is more nuanced. It's damage to the muscle fibers, but not a complete rupture. The Eagles were very careful with their language when this came out. They placed Greenard on the active PUP list, which is different from the reserve PUP list. Active PUP means he can come back at any point during training camp, as long as the medical staff clears him. Reserve PUP, that's the one that costs you the first 4 games of the regular season. Howie Roseman stepped in front of reporters before the first practice and said, "And I want you to hear this clearly," he said, "this is not a long-term injury. This is nothing we're concerned about." He said Greenard is going to be ready to play when the season starts. He referenced how prepared Greenard is as a professional. How much experience he has. How the team trusts him to come back right. And on the surface, that sounds reassuring. But here's the thing. Here's what Eagles fans know in their bones after watching this team for years. Every team says that. Every team's GM steps up to that microphone and says, "Don't worry, he'll be fine." And sometimes they're right. And sometimes, the thing that was supposed to be small gets bigger. And you spend the first 4 weeks of the regular season wondering why your $100 million edge rusher still isn't fully healthy. Now let me give you the bigger picture. Because context is everything. This isn't the first time the Eagles have had to deal with an injury to a major edge rusher acquisition. This isn't even close to the first time. Think about what happened with Haason Reddick. Think about the drama and the noise around pass rushers and this organization. Think about how many times this franchise has had to scramble, had to patch things together, had to get creative with their defensive front. The pass rush has been this team's most volatile unit. Year after year, the talent is there. The vision is there. But the bodies keep breaking. And now, on day 1 of 2026 training camp, the newest piece of that puzzle is already sidelined. The edge rusher group that the Eagles enter this camp with, outside of Greenard, consists of Jalyx Hunt and Nolan Smith Jr. as the primary guys. Hunt showed flashes in 2025 and is developing into a legitimate contributor. Smith has the athleticism to be special but has struggled to stay healthy himself. Behind them, Arnold Ebiketie, the former Atlanta Falcon who signed a one-year deal worth more than $7 million this offseason. A.J. Epineza, who the Cleveland Browns literally backed out of a deal with because his physical made them uncomfortable, the Eagles took a flyer on him anyway. 7th-round rookie Keyshawn James Newby. Jose Ramirez. That's your pass rush depth if Greenard misses time. Now some of those guys can play. Ebiketie has shown ability. Hunt has made strides. But none of them, not a single one, is the guy you traded 2 third-round picks and gave $100 million to. None of them changed the calculus the way Greenard was supposed to change it. And here's what makes this even more complicated. Greenard doesn't just fill a role on this team. He was supposed to fill a specific psychological role. When you're the reigning Super Bowl champions, every team in the league is spending the entire offseason trying to figure out how to beat you. Every offensive coordinator has your defense on a whiteboard somewhere. They're looking for the weak spots. They're designing game plans around your tendencies. And when you don't have a proven, elite, veteran pass rusher to disrupt those plans, they feel it. Quarterbacks feel it. The whole defensive ecosystem changes. Greenard was supposed to be the certified veteran disruptor. The guy who's been in the NFL 6 years, who's seen every pass protection scheme imaginable, who knows how to win in the trenches even when the offensive lineman across from him is exceptional. That experience doesn't live in Jalyx Hunt yet. It doesn't fully live in Nolan Smith yet. It lives in someone like Greenard. And right now, Greenard is in a treatment room. Let's talk about the history here. Because I think it's worth understanding exactly who Jonathan Greenard is and what kind of player the Eagles are dealing with. Greenard was drafted by the Houston Texans in the 3rd round of the 2020 NFL Draft. Out of Florida. A big, athletic, powerful edge rusher with the kind of frame that scouts love. The length, the motor, the bend. But the early part of his career was defined by injuries. In 2020, limited action as a rookie. In 2021, he started to show what he could do, but then injuries hit again. In 2022, more of the same. The Texans were patient with him because the talent was undeniable, but it felt like every time he was about to break out, something would pull him back. And then 2023 happened. Jonathan Greenard finally stayed healthy for an extended stretch. And when Jonathan Greenard stays healthy, he is terrifying. 12.5 sacks in 2023. That's not a fluke number. That's genuine, elite production. That put him in the conversation with the best edge rushers in the entire league. And it earned him a payday, a 4-year, $72 million deal with the Minnesota Vikings when he hit free agency in 2024. And then in 2024 with Minnesota, 12 sacks. Back-to-back double-digit sack seasons. He was everything the Vikings hoped he would be. But 2025 with the Vikings? That's where it started to unravel again. In Week 10 against the Baltimore Ravens, Greenard suffered a shoulder injury. He kept playing through it, because that's what veterans do, that's what guys earning their money do, but in Week 15 against the Dallas Cowboys, he aggravated it. And that was essentially it. His 2025 season was done after 12 games. 3 sacks. Season-ending shoulder surgery. The Vikings, looking at their situation, decided it was time to move on. And on the second night of the draft, they answered the phone when the Eagles called. Here's the timeline that should concern every Eagles fan just a little bit. 2023, 12.5 sacks, looked like one of the best pass rushers in football. 2024, 12 sacks, still elite. 2025, 12 games, 3 sacks, shoulder surgery. 2026, before training camp even begins, pec strain in the weight room. That's 2 consecutive years where Greenard's body has let him down at the worst possible moments. 2 years in a row of preseason optimism crashing into in-season injury reality. And now here we are again, summer, before the pads even go on, and the Eagles' most important defensive acquisition is on the physically unable to perform list. Now let's talk about money, because I think this is where it gets really uncomfortable. The Eagles gave Greenard a 4-year contract worth $100 million. $50 million of that is guaranteed. $50 million. Guaranteed. In the NFL, guaranteed money is different from what most sports fans think of as guaranteed. If Greenard is on that PUP list in Week 1 through Week 4 of the regular season, which the Eagles say won't happen, but let's just follow the math, that guaranteed money doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away. That $50 million is owed. The cap hit doesn't shrink. The financial commitment doesn't change. The Eagles made a bet. A massive, enormous, franchise-altering bet on a 31-year-old edge rusher who has spent more time in training rooms than on practice fields in the last 2 years. And now, in the very first moment of the very first day of actual camp activity, that bet is looking shaky. And let me be clear, I'm not saying this bet was wrong. The upside of Jonathan Greenard when healthy is absolutely worth the investment. A player who can produce double-digit sacks in back-to-back seasons is one of the rarest commodities in the NFL. You almost never find them available. When you do find them available, you pay whatever you have to pay to get them. Howie Roseman made the right call in the right moment. But the football gods have a sense of humor. And right now, they're laughing. Let me take you inside the head of Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni for a moment. Nick Sirianni is entering 2026 with something to prove. After the early playoff exit in 2025, after a season where injuries decimated key parts of this roster, after a year where the Eagles showed they were still elite but also showed they were still vulnerable, Sirianni needs this camp to go right. And when the first piece of news out of 2026 training camp is your star edge rusher on the PUP list, that sets a tone you don't want. Sirianni is a coach who believes deeply in the culture of preparation. He believes in the process. He believes that the work you put in during these summer months builds the foundation that holds in January. Every rep matters. Every practice matters. Every install matters. And Jonathan Greenard is going to miss all of that. At least for now. Think about what camp reps actually mean for an edge rusher on a new team. This is Greenard's first training camp as a Philadelphia Eagle. He's never been in this defensive system before. He's never aligned with Jalyx Hunt on the other side. He's never worked alongside Jihad Campbell in the linebacker core. He's never felt the rhythm of this defense, never internalized the calls from defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, never built the chemistry with the players next to him that makes good defenses great. Those reps don't come back. You can't manufacture them in a walkthrough. You can't replicate the heat of competition in a meeting room. The practice field is where understanding becomes instinct, and Greenard is going to miss that critical window. Every day he's on the PUP list is a day the other guys are getting reps he's not getting. A day Jalyx Hunt is building confidence while Greenard watches. A day the coaches are designing packages without him in mind because he's not out there to practice them. A day the defense learns to function without him, which sounds fine on paper, but has a subtle, insidious effect on how a coaching staff builds their game plans. Now, and this is important, let's talk about the guys who are going to step up. Because one thing about the Philadelphia Eagles under Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni is that this organization has built genuine depth at most positions. They don't just have starters, they have players who can play meaningful roles. And the edge rusher position is no exception. Jalyx Hunt. If you don't know that name yet, pay attention. Because Jalyx Hunt is the kind of player who can make people forget about whoever was supposed to be starting next to him. Hunt was a third-round pick who came in and showed flashes of real pass rushing ability in 2025. He's physical. He's quick off the ball. He has the motor and the relentlessness that you need to disrupt offensive lines. And with Greenard out, Hunt gets the first-team reps. He gets to line up with the starters every day. He gets the chance to show the coaching staff, the front office, and the rest of the league that he belongs in that conversation with the elite edge rushers. Some of the best things that ever happened to players in this league happened because someone else got hurt. That sounds harsh, but it's the reality of the NFL. Opportunity creates stars. And Jalyx Hunt has a golden opportunity sitting in front of him right now. Nolan Smith Jr. is in the same boat. Smith is physically one of the most gifted edge rushers in the league. The athleticism, the speed, the burst off the line, it's all there. When he's healthy and locked in, He can create problems for any offensive lineman in football. His 2025 season was disrupted by the triceps injury, but he's entering 2026 with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. Smith having a dominant training camp while Greenard is on the PUP list could actually be one of the best things to happen to this defense. Not because Greenard's injury is good, it's not. But because Smith finding himself, finding his confidence, finding his dominance in the moments when the cameras are rolling and the coaches are watching, that's a superpower this defense needs to unlock. And then there's Arnold Ebiketie, the former Falcon who signed that one-year deal in the offseason. Ebiketie is someone who has shown real pass rushing instincts and the kind of athleticism that can translate into NFL production when the conditions are right. A strong training camp could elevate him into a meaningful role on this defense, and a deeper pass rusher rotation actually makes the Eagles better in the long run. Let me give you a moment of honest perspective here, because I think it's important. The Philadelphia Eagles, as an organization, handle adversity well. This is not a team that panics. This is not a front office that makes reactive, emotional decisions when things go sideways. Howie Roseman has been through enough roster crunches, enough injury chaos, enough unexpected twists, to know how to keep a ship steady. When Roseman stepped in front of those cameras on Wednesday morning and said, "This is nothing we're concerned about," I believe he meant it. Not as a PR spin. Not as a cover-your-bases statement designed to manage perception. I think Howie Roseman genuinely believes Jonathan Greenard is going to be ready for Week 1. And the medical information they have, information we don't have, is informing that confidence. Pec strains exist on a spectrum. A mild strain is the kind of thing that a week or two of rest can resolve, especially for an elite professional athlete with access to the best medical and training staff in professional sports. The Eagles aren't going to rush Greenard back if he's not ready, but they're also not treating this like an emergency. The timing of the PUP designation matters too. Under NFL rules, a player must be placed on the active PUP list before they take any practice reps in camp. It's essentially a protective measure. It allows the team to give the player the time he needs to heal without burning a spot on the injury report or putting him in a situation where he might re-aggravate something by pushing too hard. The moment Greenard takes one rep in camp, he becomes ineligible for the PUP list during the regular season. So by putting him there now, the Eagles are buying themselves flexibility. That's smart roster management, not a crisis signal. But here's where I want to challenge that optimism just a little bit. Because I think there are legitimate questions that deserve to be asked. Jonathan Greenard is 31 years old. In NFL terms, 31 as an edge rusher is a number that carries weight. It's not ancient. It's not career-over territory. But it's the age where bodies start to send more frequent messages. It's the age where the wear and tear of 6 NFL seasons starts to accumulate in ways that are harder to recover from. It's the age where you start having to work smarter, not just harder. And what does it tell you that Greenard suffered a pec strain not from a violent collision on the football field, but from lifting weights? In a controlled environment. An environment designed for conditioning, not contact. The human body, under the stress of professional athletics, can do things that seem random but aren't. Muscles that have been overworked, repeatedly stressed, asked to function through incomplete recoveries, they can give out at unexpected moments. A pec strain in the weight room isn't just bad luck. It can be a sign that the body needs more time than the schedule allows. And when you look at Greenard's timeline, shoulder injury in Week 10 of 2025, aggravation in Week 15, surgery after the season, then a pec strain before training camp in 2026, you have to ask yourself, is this a pattern? Or is this just the brutal randomness of professional football? Nobody has that answer right now. Not the Eagles. Not Greenard. Not the medical staff. Time will tell. Months will reveal what no examination can predict with certainty. Let's talk about what this means for the Eagles' Super Bowl picture. Because ultimately, that's what this whole offseason has been about. The Philadelphia Eagles are an organization that does not rebuild. They reload. They stay aggressive. They stay in win-now mode. Trading 2 third-round picks for Greenard and signing him to a $100 million deal, that is a win-now move. That is a signal to the entire league that Philadelphia is not here to develop prospects and play the long game. They are here to win. But winning now requires your best players to be available. It requires the men you paid and planned around to be on the field when it counts. The Eagles' 2026 season has three broad phases where Greenard's health will matter enormously. Phase 1 is the regular season, and specifically the division battles. The NFC East is not a pushover. The Dallas Cowboys have continued to invest. The New York Giants have pieces. The Washington Commanders, depending on how their quarterback situation plays out, could be dangerous. Every game in the division is a fight. Every NFC East matchup is a war in the trenches. And your pass rush health matters enormously in those wars. Phase 2 is the stretch run, November and December. The games where playoff seeding gets decided. The games where wear and tear separates good teams from great ones. If Greenard comes in late and isn't fully integrated into the defense, those late-season games could expose things you don't want exposed heading into January. Phase 3 is the playoffs. And this is where the math gets brutal. In the playoffs, you are facing the other team's best offensive linemen and their best quarterbacks and their best coordinators who have had 2 weeks to prepare for everything you do. Against teams of that caliber, you need your best pass rusher ready to play. Not 75%. Not 80%. 100%. If there's any doubt, any residual doubt, about Greenard's health by January, this Eagles defense is operating at a significant disadvantage. Now let me bring another name into this conversation. One that I think every Eagles fan has heard whispered already, but not loudly enough. Brandon Graham. Brandon Graham is a Philadelphia Eagle legend. If you've watched this team at all over the last decade and a half, you know that name. You know what he means to this organization. You know the strip sack in Super Bowl 52 that changed Eagles history forever. You know what kind of player and what kind of leader he has been. And something interesting happened at the announcement of Greenard's PUP list news. When a reporter asked Howie Roseman about Greenard's situation, someone wondered aloud whether this opened the door for Brandon Graham to potentially return. And Roseman, in classic Roseman fashion, didn't dismiss it. He said they continue to communicate with their first-ever Eagles draft pick. That's not a no. Brandon Graham played for the Eagles through the 2025 season and then stepped away. But Graham at any level, on any amount of contact, in any kind of role, brings something that cannot be quantified on a stat sheet. He brings the kind of leadership and locker room presence that young edge rushers like Jalyx Hunt and Nolan Smith Jr. can learn from every single day. Could the Eagles bring Graham back in some capacity? Could they give him a veteran minimum deal just to have his voice and his football IQ in that room? With Greenard sidelined, the possibility becomes more real than it was 48 hours ago. Watch that space. Let's take a step back and appreciate the broader narrative that's unfolding here. The Philadelphia Eagles were supposed to walk into 2026 training camp as the league's gold standard. Super Bowl champions. Loaded roster. Settled quarterback situation. Howie Roseman had gone out and addressed the one clear area of need, the pass rush, in decisive fashion. Everything was supposed to be set up perfectly. And then one man lifted a weight at the wrong angle, at the wrong moment, and suddenly the most important piece of the defensive puzzle is wrapped up in a training room and the rest of the NFL is looking at Philadelphia a little differently than they were on Tuesday. That's football. That's this beautiful, brutal sport. Nothing is guaranteed. No plan survives first contact with reality. The moment you start feeling invincible, the moment you start printing t-shirts and booking hotel rooms in February, something happens to remind you that this game doesn't care about your feelings. The Eagles know this. They've lived it. They've been through enough seasons, enough heartbreak, enough unexpected twists, to understand that you handle adversity with process, not panic. You put your head down. You get to work. You trust the people around you. And there's something powerful about the way they're approaching this. Because the first practice of 2026 training camp, despite everything, was described by reporters on the ground as one of the most impressive opening practices this Eagles organization has had in years. Outside of Greenard's PUP designation, the team had full participation. Nobody else was even listed as limited. That almost never happens. Lane Johnson came out and praised the new offense under coordinator Sean Mannion. Jalen Hurts looked sharp. The defense, even without Greenard, was active and physical. Jihad Campbell, who has dealt with his own shoulder injury this offseason, was out there working. The energy was right. One reporter who has covered this team for 14 years said something remarkable after day one. He said he couldn't remember a day one with that level of full participation. That speaks to a healthy roster, a motivated group, and a coaching staff that has this team ready to compete. Now let's think about Jalen Hurts for a moment. Because every conversation about the Eagles' Super Bowl chances circles back to number one. Jalen Hurts is the engine. Everything this team does offensively runs through him. When Hurts is right, when he's healthy, when he's locked in, when he's reading defenses and making the right decisions, the Eagles are nearly impossible to stop. We watched that in the Super Bowl 59 run. We watched it in the regular season. But here's what a strong pass rush does for Jalen Hurts, and this is something casual fans don't always appreciate. A great defense creates short fields. It creates third and long situations. It creates turnovers. It creates quick drives for the other team that keep the opposing offense off the field and give Hurts and the Eagles' offense more opportunities. A pass rush that can force the opposing quarterback into uncomfortable decisions doesn't just help the defense, it helps the offense. It accelerates the entire game. It tilts the field. If Greenard is not right, if that pass rush isn't generating the pressure this defense needs, opposing offenses will have more time. Opposing quarterbacks will have more room to breathe. And when opposing quarterbacks have room to breathe, they can keep pace with whatever the Eagles put up offensively. And that makes every game harder. Hurts needs that defense to carry its weight. And that defense needs its pass rushers to carry their weight. This isn't a silo problem. It's a system problem. And Greenard being on the PUP list on day one of camp sends ripples through every corner of what this team is trying to build. There's a version of this story that ends well. Greenard heals faster than anyone expected. He's back on the practice field in 2 weeks. He spends the rest of camp getting comfortable with his teammates, learning the system, building chemistry. He walks into week 1 against the Dallas Cowboys, because you know it's going to be the Cowboys for the Eagles season opener. That's just how the universe works. And he plays 40, 50, 60 snaps of pass rushing football. He wins his one-on-ones. He creates pressure. He makes the quarterback uncomfortable. He reminds everyone why Philadelphia traded 2 third-rounders and paid him $100 million. That version exists. That version is completely plausible. A pec strain that's caught early and managed correctly doesn't have to derail a season. Plenty of players have dealt with similar setbacks and come back with 0 lingering effects. There's also a version of this story that ends less well. Greenard's pec takes longer than expected to heal. He misses most of training camp. He comes back for the preseason but isn't quite right, a little hesitant, a little off in his timing, still finding his way in the system. He starts the regular season, but the confidence isn't all the way there. The integration with his teammates is incomplete. And by the time you get to November, you're asking yourself whether this investment is ever going to pay off. Both versions are real. Both versions are possible. And right now, in the first hours after this news broke, nobody knows which version we're living in. Let me bring this home with one more layer of context that I think is essential. Jonathan Greenard is a grown man who has overcome setbacks before. He has been counted out before. He has been injured before, repeatedly, and he has come back every time and produced. 12.5 sacks in 2023 didn't happen because Greenard got lucky. They happened because this man put in the work, stayed focused, fought through adversity, and delivered when it mattered. That's who the Eagles bet on. Not just the physical tools. Not just the athleticism. They bet on a competitor. They bet on a professional. They bet on a man who knows how to rebuild himself when things go wrong. And maybe this pec strain happened at the exact right moment. If it had to happen somewhere, if the body was going to send that signal, isn't it better for it to send it now? In July. Before the regular season? Rather than in week 8 of a playoff push, when every game is a must-win and there's no room to breathe. The Eagles will have weeks to manage this properly. They have some of the best medical staff in professional sports. They have the resources and the time to make sure Greenard heals completely, heals correctly, and comes back better than if he had pushed through something that wasn't ready. That's the optimist's read. And honestly, it's not wrong. Here's what you need to watch in the coming days and weeks. First, watch how quickly Greenard comes off the PUP list. If he's back practicing in 7 to 10 days, that's a great sign. That means the injury was genuinely minor, the healing is on track, and the Eagles weren't just spin-doctoring their way through the announcement. Every day of practice Greenard gets before the regular season matters. 5 days is better than 3. 10 is better than 5. Second, watch Jalyx Hunt. Because Hunt is the story within the story here. Every time he wins a rep, every time he gets to the quarterback, every time he shows up in an 11-on-11 drill and makes something happen, he's writing the next chapter of his own career. And he's proving that the Eagles' defensive depth is real, not just theoretical. Third, watch Nolan Smith Jr.'s practice reports. If Smith is healthy, if Smith is moving with the explosiveness that made him a first-round pick, if Smith is out there looking like the dominant force this defense needs him to be, then Greenard's absence becomes much more manageable. 2 healthy edge rushers flanking Jalen Carter's interior pressure? That's still a nightmare for opposing offenses. Fourth, watch whether Brandon Graham's name comes up again. If reporters start asking more specifically about Graham's potential return, if there's any movement on that front, it tells you the Eagles are thinking about their pass rush depth in a more serious way than the public statements suggest. And fifth, watch the mood in that locker room. The best teams find ways to use adversity as motivation. They find ways to say, you know what, this is just another test. We've been through harder things. We know who we are. We know what we're capable of. And when Greenard gets back, we'll be even stronger because we went through this together. That's Eagle football. That's the standard Nick Sirianni has tried to set. That's the culture Jalen Hurts models every single day. So here we are. Day 1 of Eagles' 2026 training camp. The most important off-season acquisition is on the PUP list before he threw a single punch. The $100 million bet is sitting in a training room instead of on the practice field. And yet, this is also a team that has Jalen Hurts under center. A team that just signed Jalen Carter to a massive extension. A team where Lane Johnson is praising the new offensive system. A team where the first full practice of the summer was the healthiest opening day a veteran journalist has seen in 14 years of covering the franchise. The Philadelphia Eagles are not a team in crisis. They are a team navigating a complication. And there is a massive, enormous, championship-sized difference between those two things. Jonathan Greenard will be back on that practice field. The question is only when. And every day that passes without further bad news is a day that gets this team closer to the version of themselves they need to be. Eagles fans have been here before. They've watched this franchise navigate impossible moments and come out the other side stronger. They've watched injured players become motivational figures. They've watched depth guys become stars. They've watched a culture built on accountability and resilience face test after test and refuse to break. This is another test. And if history is any guide, if the Philadelphia Eagles that we have watched for the last several years is any indication, they are going to pass it. But for right now, on this day, in this moment, the injury report says what the injury report says. Jonathan Greenard is on the PUP list. The pass rush questions are real. The investment is massive. The stakes are enormous. And Eagles Nation is holding its breath. This is the Philadelphia Eagles. Nothing is ever easy. Nothing is ever clean. Nothing is ever handed to you without a fight. But when this team is healthy, when all the pieces are in place, when the machine is running the way it's supposed to run, there is nobody in the National Football League who wants to face them. The question is whether they can get all the pieces healthy. The question is whether Jonathan Greenard can defy the pattern and be there when it matters. The question is whether this $100 million bet pays off. We're just getting started. Training camp is day 1. The answers are ahead of us, not behind us. Stay locked in. Because this story is far from over.